It was a chilly Tuesday morning when Harold Bennett, 72 years old and a retired firefighter from Boston, first felt something was truly wrong. He had just climbed the 3 steps leading from his garage into his kitchen, a climb he had done thousands of times without thinking, but this time his legs trembled beneath him as if they were carrying the weight of the world. Harold froze, his hand gripping the doorframe, not because he was out of breath, but because for the first time he wondered if he was losing the steady strength that had carried him through decades of running into burning buildings. That moment settled in his chest like a stone. For a man who had always been defined by action, by his ability to trust his body, it was a quiet but terrifying question. Was he starting to lose his independence? In the days that followed, Harold began noticing small changes he could no longer dismiss. Climbing the stairs to his second floor felt heavier, as if each step was an uphill battle. Standing from his recliner after a short rest brought an awkward stiffness to his knees. Some mornings, his legs felt fine. Other days, they were stubborn and achy without warning. But it was the night cramps that truly got to him. Those sudden, searing jolts in his calves that would drag him out of sleep, leaving him standing by the bed in the dark, stretching and grimacing until they passed. He told himself it was just age catching up. After all, he was in his 70s. But deep down, a stubborn voice whispered, "Something else is going on here." Harold had been active all his life. Even after retiring, he maintained a small workshop where he built birdhouses for the local community. He took walks with his wife, Carol, along the Charles River. He gardened. He fixed things around the house. He was the neighbor everyone could count on to lend a hand. But slowly, subtly, he began to avoid certain tasks. Carrying heavy grocery bags up the front steps felt more tiring than it should. Bending down to weed the garden took longer to recover from. And the truth he didn't want to admit was that he'd started parking closer to store entrances, not out of convenience, but because his legs simply didn't feel as steady as they used to. I've known Harold for years, both as a patient and as a friend. Sitting across from him in my office, I could see the frustration in his face. He wasn't the type to complain, but I could tell the change in his legs was gnawing at his sense of self. I asked him to tell me about his daily routine, his eating habits, his sleep. As he spoke, something became clear. Harold was doing many things right. He stayed active, ate home-cooked meals, and never smoked, but there was a missing piece. His diet, though balanced in appearance, lacked key nutrients and enough daily fuel to keep his muscles and circulation in peak condition. What struck me was how common this was among people his age. They think they're eating well, and in many ways they are, but their legs are quietly undernourished. That's the part most people miss. It's not always about age, at least not directly. Yes, time changes our bodies, but sometimes what feels like just getting old is really the body struggling without the right fuel. Think of your leg muscles as hard-working engines. They need hydration, minerals, protein, and good circulation to function well. Without that steady supply, even the strongest engine begins to sputter. And when it does, the changes show up exactly the way Harold was experiencing them. More fatigue, slower recovery, balance that doesn't feel quite as sure, and pain or stiffness that seems to come out of nowhere. The real turning point for Harold came one evening when his granddaughter invited him to join her on the playground slide, a silly, joyful tradition they'd shared since she was a toddler. But halfway up the steps to the slide, Harold felt a pang in his right calf so sharp that he had to stop. His granddaughter called back, "Come on, Grandpa." But he shook his head and told her to go ahead without him. He stood there, watching her laugh at the top, smiling through the moment. But inside he felt an ache that had nothing to do with muscles. It was the fear that his body might be stepping away from the life he loved. That night, Harold and I spoke on the phone. He admitted he wasn't afraid of pain itself. He'd endured far worse in his firefighting years, but he was deeply afraid of becoming a burden, losing the ability to climb a ladder, to carry his tools, to run with his grandchildren. These were freedoms he didn't want to surrender without a fight. And that's where our journey together began. I told him that while we can't turn back the clock, we can absolutely help his legs become stronger, steadier, and more resilient even now. It wouldn't come from a miracle pill or a fancy supplement. It would come from the simplest daily rituals, foods and drinks that nourish the body in the ways aging makes most necessary. I remember the way he leaned forward when I said that. Harold is a man of action. And the idea that he could do something concrete starting right away lit a spark in his eyes. I explained that the solution wasn't about flooding his body with protein shakes or buying expensive treatments. It was about targeted nourishment, drinks so simple he could make them in his own kitchen that would work with his body's needs, calm the inflammation, quietly stealing his strength, and feed the muscles and joints what they were silently asking for. Over the following weeks, Harold began making small but deliberate changes. He started his mornings with a potassium and magnesium-rich smoothie. He sipped warm turmeric milk in the evenings, letting the golden drink ease the stiffness from his knees and coax him into deeper sleep. He introduced rich, collagen-filled bone broth into his weekly meals, and as he did, he noticed something that surprised him. Not a dramatic, overnight change, but a quiet, steady return of confidence in his own legs. He could climb the stairs without thinking about each step. The night cramps disappeared. He started taking the long route on his evening walks again, just because it felt good. This isn't a story about magic. It's a story about listening to your body and giving it what it needs, consistently and with care. Harold's journey reminds us that aging isn't a slow slide into limitation. It's an opportunity to be more intentional, to feed strength where it matters most, and to treat our bodies with the same respect and commitment we'd give to any tool or engine we depend on. As I share Harold's experience in the coming moments, I want you to keep in mind that this isn't about perfection. It's about progress, about building a rhythm of nourishment and movement that keeps your legs not only strong, but steady, so they can carry you to all the places, people, and moments you cherish most. Harold had always prided himself on being the type of man who could trust his legs to carry him anywhere. In his firefighting days, those legs had charged up staircases 2 at a time, balanced on rooftops in the pouring rain, and held steady while carrying people to safety. But lately, something had shifted. One Saturday morning, while heading out to fix a broken fence in the yard, Harold felt a strange heaviness in his thighs. It wasn't soreness from exercise, it was a kind of quiet drag, as though his legs were saying, "We're tired before we've even started." That puzzled him. He hadn't been overworking himself. His days were active, but not extreme. Walking, tending the garden, tinkering in his workshop. If anything, he thought he was taking better care of himself than ever. So why did his legs feel as though each step was carrying extra weight? He'd been chalking it up to just getting older, but the change felt too sudden, too noticeable. In the back of his mind, the thought crept in, what if something's wrong? The moment of clarity came during his weekly grocery run with Carol. The two of them had parked in their usual spot, halfway down the lot. As they carried their bags toward the house, Harold found himself lagging behind. The bags weren't heavy, but his calves were already burning. "You okay back there?" Carol called over her shoulder with a smile. Harold laughed it off, saying he was just enjoying the fresh air, but inside he knew the truth. His legs felt drained, as if he'd run a mile instead of walking across the driveway. That afternoon, Harold sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee, staring out at the backyard. He thought about how often he'd felt this fatigue lately. He could still do everything, but it took more effort. Climbing the stairs left him breathing a little heavier. Standing up after a rest made his knees ache for a moment. And then there were the cramps, short bursts of pain that seemed to come from nowhere, especially at night. He hated the idea of complaining, but the truth was eating at him. Something had changed, and it wasn't just age. When he mentioned it at his next checkup, I listened closely. As a doctor who spent decades caring for older adults, I've heard this story countless times, but each time, it's personal. Harold, I said, it's not always about your age. Sometimes your legs aren't weak because you're older. They're weak because they're running low on the right kind of fuel. He raised an eyebrow. Fuel? You mean food? I nodded. Exactly. Muscles are like engines. They can be strong, but if you're not giving them what they need every day, enough hydration, minerals, and protein, they can't perform their best. I could see him mulling that over. Harold had never thought of his muscles as something that needed daily refueling beyond just eating 3 meals. He ate what he thought was a healthy diet: some toast and coffee in the morning, a sandwich for lunch, a home-cooked dinner. But when we looked closer, his meals were low in certain key nutrients that help muscles work well, especially for someone his age. It's like running a car on half a tank all the time, I explained. It'll get you where you're going for a while, but eventually it's going to sputter. The idea that his legs might just be undernourished gave Harold a spark of hope. It meant this wasn't necessarily an unstoppable decline. It meant there was something he could do, but there was also a flicker of frustration. Why hadn't anyone told him this before? He'd always assumed eating decently was enough. He didn't realize that at his age, the body's needs change in ways that require more than just a balanced dinner plate. That night, Harold couldn't stop thinking about the fuel idea. He found himself looking back over his days. How often he skipped breakfast if he wasn't hungry, how little water he drank when he got busy in the workshop, how his lunches rarely had much protein, and he remembered all the times he'd pushed through fatigue, thinking it was just normal for a man in his 70s. Now he wondered if he'd been ignoring warning signs. The next morning, Harold stood in his kitchen and made a quiet promise to himself. He wouldn't brush this off anymore. He was going to start treating his legs like they mattered, feeding them, hydrating them, giving them every possible advantage, because these legs had carried him through a lifetime of challenges, and he wasn't about to let them slow him down without a fight. It was a small thing, but it stuck with Harold. He'd been carrying a load of laundry up the stairs, just one basket, not particularly heavy, and by the time he reached the top, his thighs were tight and his breath was a little short. He paused at the landing, pretending to glance at a picture on the wall, but really, he was giving his legs a moment to recover. Carol, coming up behind him, asked if he was all right. He smiled, said yes, and kept moving toward the bedroom, but inside, he was troubled. These were the same stairs he'd climbed effortlessly for decades. Why did they feel steeper now? Later that evening, over a cup of tea, Harold brought it up again. It's the oddest thing, he said. The stairs feel harder. I don't think they've grown any taller. I chuckled at his joke, but I knew exactly what he meant. For many people, in their 60s and 70s, stairs become a quiet test of endurance. Not because the steps themselves have changed, but because the body's capacity to handle that steady upward push has shifted. It's not always about weak muscles. It's often about what's happening deep inside those muscles. I explained to Harold that muscles don't just work on strength alone. They depend heavily on blood flow to bring them oxygen and nutrients with every contraction. Climbing stairs asks your muscles for a quick, intense burst of energy. If circulation isn't at its best, if blood is moving a little slower, or the vessels aren't delivering as efficiently, those muscles tire out much faster. Think of it like watering a garden, I told him. If the hose is kinked or the water pressure is low, the plants get less water. They might survive, but they won't thrive. Harold leaned back in his chair, processing that. So you're saying it's not just my legs getting old, it's the supply line that's slowing down. Exactly, I said, And here's the thing, circulation can be improved, but it needs your help. Your body responds to movement, hydration, and certain nutrients that keep the blood flowing freely. Without them, even strong legs will feel heavy. He nodded slowly, remembering times when his legs had felt better after a walk, almost as if the movement itself had woken them up. That night, Harold thought about how often he used to run up and down stairs without a second thought. He remembered working at the fire station, how they'd take the stairs 2 at a time during drills, laughing and racing each other to the top. Now each flight felt like a climb to a mountain summit, but instead of letting that thought discourage him, he took it as a challenge. If circulation was the key, then maybe he could start working on ways to improve it, just as he'd trained for endurance in his younger years. The next morning, he started with a small change. Before tackling the stairs, he walked a slow loop around the living room, swinging his arms and breathing deeply. He noticed that the short warm-up made the first few steps easier. Encouraged, he kept at it over the next few days. It wasn't a magic fix, but it was a start, and each time he reached the top without pausing, he felt a little victory. I also suggested he add certain foods and drinks that naturally supported circulation. Remember, I told him, you're not just building strength, you're building the delivery system that feeds that strength. Harold liked that image. It reminded him of the old fire trucks, how they needed water flowing at full pressure to put out a fire. Without pressure, the hoses were useless, no matter how strong the firefighters were. Gradually, Harold began to think of the stairs, not as an obstacle, but as a daily test of progress. Some days, he still felt the burn, but other days, especially after eating and hydrating well, the climb felt lighter. And with each step, he wasn't just getting to the next floor, he was reclaiming something that mattered deeply to him, the quiet confidence that his legs could still carry him wherever he wanted to go. One quiet Sunday afternoon, Harold and I sat together in my office, sunlight streaming in through the blinds. He leaned back in the chair, hands clasped over his stomach, and sighed. "Maybe I should just accept it," he said. "I'm 72, my legs aren't supposed to feel like they did when I was 30. I smiled gently because I'd heard that phrase so many times from people his age. It's a natural thought. After all, we've been told all our lives that aging is a slow, unavoidable decline. But I wanted Harold to see things differently. "Harold," I began, "you're right that age changes our bodies. But here's the part most people get wrong. Change doesn't have to mean collapse. We tend to blame age for every ache, every moment of fatigue. But in truth, a lot of what we call aging is really the result of habits, nutrition gaps, and silent processes we can influence." I could see his eyes narrow with interest. "So you're saying this isn't just the number on my birthday cake?" I nodded. "Exactly. Age sets the stage, but it doesn't write the whole play." To make my point, I told him about other patients, men and women in their 70s and 80s, who still walked miles a day, gardened, and even hiked, not because they had magical genes, but because they gave their bodies the right support. They ate foods that reduced inflammation instead of feeding it. They stayed hydrated so their muscles could fire properly. They made small daily movements to keep their circulation active. The common thread wasn't luck, it was intention. Harold tilted his head thoughtfully. "So what I'm feeling, this weakness, could be from something I'm not doing rather than something I can't change." "Yes," I said. "Think about it. If you take a perfectly good engine and let it run low on oil, it's going to strain and wear down faster. But refill it with the right oil, maintain it regularly, and it will keep running for years. Your legs are no different." That image landed with Harold. As a man who had spent years maintaining fire trucks, he knew exactly how small oversights could lead to big problems. The shift in his mindset was subtle but powerful. Instead of feeling doomed by his age, he began to see his legs as something he could work on, something he could invest in, and protect. That evening, he told Carol about our conversation over dinner. "It's not just old age," he explained. "There's more going on, and I think I can do something about it." She smiled, clearly relieved to see the hope returning to his voice. From that day on, Harold started paying closer attention. He noticed how his legs felt after certain meals, how they responded to a glass of water in the afternoon, how they loosened up after a short walk. He realized that when he went too long without eating enough protein, his muscles felt heavier the next morning. When he skimped on water, his calves cramped more easily. It was as if his body had been sending him messages for years, but he was only now learning the language. And perhaps most importantly, Harold stopped telling himself the story that this was just what happens when you get older. That story had kept him from looking for solutions, had quietly encouraged him to give up ground he didn't have to lose. Now, with a new perspective, he was ready to see what would happen if he gave his legs, not his age, the credit, attention, and care they deserved. The first time I suggested golden milk to Harold, he raised an eyebrow. "You're telling me warm milk with spices is going to help my legs?" he asked with a half smile. I could hear the doubt in his voice. Harold was a practical man. If something didn't involve a wrench, a hammer, or a clear explanation, he wasn't buying it. But I could also tell he was curious, especially when I mentioned that golden milk wasn't some trendy invention, but a drink with centuries of tradition behind it, used to soothe joints, calm the body, and even help with deep, restorative sleep. I explained that the star of the drink, turmeric, contained a compound called curcumin, one of nature's most effective anti-inflammatories. Inflammation is like a small fire smoldering in your muscles and joints, I told him. You don't see it, but it's there, making your knees stiff in the morning and your calves ache after a short walk. Turmeric helps turn that fire down so your body can heal and move more easily. Harold leaned back, thinking about the way his knees often felt tight after sitting too long. "So you're saying this could help calm that down?" "Exactly," I said. That night, Harold decided to give it a try. Carol was delighted. She'd always liked the warm, comforting scent of turmeric and cinnamon. She heated a cup of almond milk on the stove, whisked in half a teaspoon of turmeric, a pinch of black pepper, and a little cinnamon. As the drink warmed, the kitchen filled with a golden, earthy aroma that felt almost like a hug. Harold took his first sip slowly. It was rich, smooth, and slightly sweet from the drizzle of honey Carol had added. "Not bad," he admitted, though he still looked skeptical about whether it would do anything. But something interesting happened. About an hour after finishing the cup, Harold felt an unexpected sense of calm, not just in his mind, but in his body. The usual stiffness in his knees seemed less noticeable, and when he went to bed, he found himself falling into a deeper sleep than usual. Normally, he would wake up once or twice in the night to adjust his legs or stretch out a mild cramp. But that night, he slept straight through until morning. When he woke, he sat on the edge of the bed, rotating his ankles. The ache was there, but softer, like someone had loosened a knot that had been pulling too tight for too long. Encouraged, Harold made golden milk part of his evening ritual. Within a week, he noticed that his legs felt a little lighter in the mornings. The cramps that used to wake him had all but disappeared, and perhaps most importantly, his sleep was consistently deeper. As he told me during our next visit, "It's like my body's actually resting at night instead of just lying there." I explained that better sleep was one of the most powerful tools for healing muscle and joint tissue. When the body is well rested, recovery speeds up, inflammation drops, and energy returns. Carol noticed the change too. She teased Harold that he was becoming a golden milk evangelist because he'd started telling his friends at the hardware store about it. But Harold didn't mind. For him, it wasn't about the drink itself. It was about what it represented. It was a reminder that small, consistent choices could make a real difference. Each warm cup was a signal to his body, I'm here for you, I'm taking care of you, we're in this together. And as simple as it was, that nightly ritual gave Harold something he hadn't felt in a while, control, not over his age or the passage of time, but over how he responded to it. He began to see his legs not as a part of him that was fading, but as a part that could be cared for, strengthened, and supported. Golden milk was just the beginning, but it was the first real step in proving to himself that improvement was possible. It was a rainy Thursday when Harold stopped by my office again, this time holding a small jar of turmeric in his hand, like it was some kind of prized treasure. You know, he said, settling into the chair, I think this stuff might actually be working. His tone was half surprised, half pleased, the way someone might sound after finally fixing a stubborn squeak in an old door. He'd been drinking golden milk every evening for the past 2 weeks, and the difference was showing, not just in his knees and calves, but in the way he carried himself. There was a spring in his step that hadn't been there in months. I smiled, knowing exactly why he was feeling that way. That's the power of calming inflammation, I told him. Most people think of inflammation as something you see, redness, swelling, pain, but in reality, the most dangerous inflammation is the kind you can't see. It works quietly, day after day, wearing down your muscles, your joints, and even your blood vessels. Harold nodded slowly, as if putting the pieces together. So that's why some days my legs feel fine and other days they feel like lead. Exactly, I said. That invisible fire burns hotter some days, and your body pays the price. We talked about how turmeric, paired with a pinch of black pepper, was more than just a kitchen spice. It was one of nature's oldest and most reliable tools for turning down that hidden fire. I explained that curcumin, the active compound in turmeric, had been studied for its ability to lower markers of chronic inflammation in the blood. It's like sending a gentle rain over a field that's been smoldering for years, I said. It doesn't flood it, it doesn't wash it away overnight, but day after day it softens the heat, letting the ground heal. Harold liked that image. It reminded him of the firehouse days when they'd sometimes work for hours, putting out hot spots after the flames were gone. So you're saying, I've got hot spots in my legs, he joked. Something like that, I chuckled, and every cup of golden milk you drink is like another bucket of water. That evening, Harold shared what he'd learned with Carol over dinner. She was genuinely impressed, not just by the science, but by how much better Harold seemed lately. You've been getting up from your chair without groaning, she teased. I almost missed the sound. Harold laughed, but he knew she was right. The stiffness that used to cling to him after sitting had eased. The heaviness in his legs at the end of the day had lightened, and those nighttime cramps practically gone. But Harold wasn't content to stop there. The success with turmeric made him wonder, what other small changes could make a big difference? If one humble kitchen spice could ease years of quiet discomfort, maybe there were other things hiding in plain sight, waiting to help him. As he sat that night with his warm cup of golden milk in hand, Harold decided he was ready to keep going. Because if inflammation had been quietly stealing his strength, he was determined to take it back, one sip, one step, one small victory at a time. Harold had started to notice something unexpected. Ever since he'd been drinking golden milk in the evenings, his nights were calmer, his knees felt looser, and he was sleeping through without the jolts of calf cramps that used to drag him out of bed. But there was another change, one he hadn't expected. When he woke up in the mornings, his legs didn't feel as heavy as before. He told me about it during one of our check-ins. It's like they're ready to go the moment I stand up, he said. Before, it took a while to shake off that stiffness. That was exactly what I'd hoped to hear. I explained to Harold that nighttime isn't just a break for your mind. It's also a critical recovery period for your circulation. When you sleep, your heart rate slows, your blood vessels relax, and your body repairs tiny bits of damage that happen during the day. But if circulation isn't flowing freely, if your blood vessels are narrowed or your muscles are tight, even the best sleep can leave you waking up sluggish. Think of it like watering a garden, I told him. If the hose is kinked at night, the plants are thirsty in the morning. Your legs are the same. Harold nodded. He thought back to mornings when he'd roll out of bed, shuffle toward the bathroom, and feel like his calves were dragging behind him. Now, the difference was clear. He could get moving faster, and those first steps of the day felt more natural. Carol noticed it too. "You don't do that little limp anymore," she said one morning as they headed to the kitchen. Harold laughed, not realizing he'd had a little limp in the first place. I encouraged Harold to build on this progress with a simple nightly habit. "Before bed, take a few minutes to stretch your calves, ankles, and thighs," I said. "Nothing complicated, just gentle movements to keep the blood flowing and to remind your vessels to stay open." He started doing it every night, standing by the bed, pressing his heel into the floor to stretch his calves, lifting each knee slowly, circling his ankles. It only took 3 minutes, but it made the warm golden milk feel like part of a complete bedtime routine. And then there was the pillow trick. I suggested Harold try sleeping with a small pillow under his calves, not too high, just enough to lift his legs slightly above his heart. This simple change let gravity help his circulation instead of fighting against it. "Feels a little funny at first," he admitted, "but I'll try anything that works." After a week, he was hooked. "I didn't think a little pillow could do much," he told me with a grin, "but I swear my legs feel lighter when I wake up." And Harold began to see nighttime not as a passive break from the day, but as a strategic window to feed and restore his legs. Golden milk, gentle stretches, and that small pillow under his calves were like a team working while he slept. And every morning, the payoff was there. Lighter legs, easier steps, and the quiet satisfaction of knowing he was giving his circulation the attention it had been quietly asking for all along. Harold had been making steady progress. The golden milk at night, the gentle stretches before bed, even that small pillow under his calves, they were all adding up. His mornings were lighter, his legs less stubborn, and the cramps that once startled him awake had faded into memory. But there was still one thing that lingered, quietly reminding him that his journey wasn't over. A soft, nagging ache deep in his knees whenever he'd bend down to pick something up or climb the stairs a little faster than usual. One afternoon, Harold stopped by my office, holding a brown paper bag. He set it down on my desk and pulled out a mason jar filled with a rich, amber liquid. "Carol made this," he said proudly. "She calls it liquid gold. Wants me to drink it every day." I smiled the moment I saw it. "Bone broth," I said. "Looks like Carol's ahead of me this time." Harold grinned. "She says it's supposed to be good for my joints. You agree?" I nodded, without hesitation. "Harold, bone broth isn't just soup. It's structure in a cup. It's one of the simplest, most natural ways to feed your joints and muscles exactly what they're made of." He tilted his head, curious. "What do you mean?" I explained that when you simmer bones, whether chicken, beef, or even fish, for many hours, you're gently pulling out collagen, gelatin, amino acids, and minerals from the cartilage, tendons, and marrow. These are the very same building blocks that your body uses to repair and strengthen its own connective tissue. "You know how a fire truck needs sturdy hoses to handle the water pressure?" I asked him. "Your joints are like those hoses. Over time, if the material wears thin, it can't hold up under stress. Bone broth helps reinforce that material. It's like patching the weak spots before they burst." Harold leaned back, impressed. "So I'm basically drinking spare parts for my knees?" I laughed. "In a way, yes. You're giving your body the raw materials it needs to rebuild. We talked about how collagen production naturally drops after age 50 and even more sharply after 60. Without enough collagen, the cartilage in the knees can become thinner, the ligaments less flexible, and the muscles slower to repair after strain. That's when you start to notice more creaks, more stiffness, and slower recovery, even from simple activities, like walking or gardening. You can't stop time, I told him, but you can slow the wear by topping up what your body needs. Bone broth does exactly that, in a form your body can absorb easily. That night, Harold and Carol made a small ritual of it. They simmered chicken bones in a big pot with onions, carrots, celery, garlic, and a splash of apple cider vinegar. The vinegar, I'd told them, helps draw more minerals out of the bones. The broth bubbled gently for hours, filling the house with a rich, comforting aroma. Later they strained it, poured it into jars, and lined them up in the fridge. "Looks like we're stocking up for winter," Carol said, smiling. Harold didn't mind. He liked the idea of having his joint medicine ready to go. The next morning, Harold warmed a cup and sipped it slowly before heading out to the workshop. The flavor was deep and savory, the kind of taste that makes you feel nourished even before it hits your stomach. He wasn't expecting immediate magic, but over the next couple of weeks, he began to notice subtle changes. His knees didn't protest as much when he crouched down to look under his workbench. Carrying the grocery bags up the steps felt steadier, and perhaps most satisfying of all, bending down to tie his shoes no longer made him wince. One Saturday, Harold spent the morning helping his neighbor fix a sagging garden gate. They worked for hours, measuring, drilling, lifting the heavy wooden frame into place. By the time Harold went inside for lunch, he realized something unusual. His knees weren't throbbing the way they normally would after that kind of work. There was a tiredness, sure, but not that deep, grinding ache. "It's the broth," Carol said knowingly when he told her. Harold wasn't so sure. It seemed almost too simple, but deep down, he knew she was probably right. When Harold came in for his next visit, I could see the difference before he even sat down. His gait was smoother, his posture a little taller. "You've been keeping up with the broth?" I asked. He nodded. "Every day, sometimes twice if it's cold out." I smiled. That consistency is what makes the difference. You're feeding your joints what they need to stay strong, and over time, they're thanking you for it. I explained that bone broth's benefits go beyond just collagen. It's also rich in minerals like calcium, magnesium, and phosphorus, critical for bone strength and muscle control. And because it's easy to digest, your body can actually use those nutrients more effectively than it might from a pill or heavily processed supplement. You've basically given your knees a construction crew, I told him, and they've been busy. Harold liked that image. It made him think about all the years he'd spent maintaining equipment at the firehouse, tightening bolts, replacing worn parts, making sure everything was ready when it was needed. "Guess I'm just doing the same thing now," he said. "Only the equipment is me." From then on, bone broth became a staple in Harold's week. Some days he drank it plain from a mug, savoring the warmth. Other days, Carol used it as the base for soups and stews, loading them with vegetables and herbs. The simplicity of it appealed to Harold. It wasn't complicated, it wasn't expensive, and it didn't require a trip to the pharmacy. It was something he could make, store, and rely on. One evening, as he sat in his favorite chair with a steaming cup in hand, Harold thought about how far he'd come. Just a few months earlier, his legs had felt unpredictable, some days fine, others stubborn and heavy. The fear of losing his independence had been real, whispering in the back of his mind. But now, he was starting to feel like himself again, stronger, more capable, more sure-footed, and all from changes that felt almost too small to matter, Except they did matter. They were adding up, sip by sip, day by day. "Funny," Harold said to Carol that night. "I used to think taking care of my legs meant pushing them harder, exercising more, walking longer. But it turns out part of it is just feeding them right." She nodded. "Like you always say about your tools, you can't expect them to work if you don't maintain them." Harold chuckled. "Guess I've finally started listening to my own advice." And in that quiet moment, with the steam rising from his cup and the warmth settling into his body, Harold realized that he was no longer just hoping to keep his legs strong. He was actively doing it, not with some grand overhaul, but with steady, nourishing habits that fit into his life as naturally as breathing. Bone broth was more than a drink. It was a promise to himself, a promise that his legs, his freedom, and his way of life were worth every careful choice he made. By the time Harold had been faithfully drinking his golden milk and bone broth for a couple of months, the changes in his legs were no longer subtle. He could feel them in the way he walked across the living room without that cautious hesitation, and in how he bent down to retrieve a dropped pen without his knees, reminding him of their presence. But one afternoon, while we were talking in my office, Harold admitted something that caught my attention. "You know," he said, "I feel stronger, but I'm not sure I'm actually building strength. Like, what if I'm just keeping myself from getting worse instead of really getting better?" His voice carried that mix of curiosity and concern that often comes when someone has tasted improvement but isn't yet convinced they've reached their full potential. It was a good question, and one I was happy to answer. "Harold," I began, "what you've been doing so far is laying the foundation. You've calmed the inflammation that was stealing your strength. You've started restoring the raw materials your joints and muscles need. But now, if you want to see your strength truly grow again, you have to build from the inside out." He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "And what does that actually mean?" "It means feeding your muscles and connective tissue and making sure your body knows how to use that fuel to repair and rebuild," I explained. "You've probably heard of collagen and protein before, but here's the thing. At your age, your body doesn't absorb or use them as efficiently as it did when you were younger. That's why we've started giving you collagen-rich foods like bone broth. But you also need to make sure your body can activate that rebuilding process." Harold thought about this for a moment. "So, I've got the materials in the warehouse, but I need to hire the crew to actually put them to work?" I laughed. "Exactly. And the crew is your body's repair signals, your circulation, and your muscle activation. Think of it as 3 shifts working together. Without all 3, the warehouse stays full, but the building never goes up." I reminded him of a basic truth about muscle and joint health. Nutrition alone can't make the legs stronger without use, but use without nutrition just wears them down faster. "When we combine the right fuel with the right movement," I told him, "your body starts reinforcing the very structures that support you. That's when you notice you're not just holding steady, you're actually improving." Harold nodded, and I could see the gears turning. He'd always been a hands-on man, someone who liked to see visible results from his work. The idea that he could build something inside his own body appealed to him in a way that abstract health advice never had. We decided to start small. I asked him to add 2 short strengthening sessions each week. Nothing intimidating, just focused movements to tell his body, we still need these muscles. Things like slowly rising from a chair without using his hands, stepping up onto a low platform, or doing gentle calf raises while holding on to the kitchen counter. "You don't need a gym," I told him. "You need signals. You're telling your body that these muscles matter, so it should spend its resources on keeping them strong." At the same time, I asked Harold to keep up his bone broth habit and to add a little extra protein to each meal, an egg at breakfast, some chicken or beans at lunch, a bit of fish or tofu at dinner. We talked about spacing protein throughout the day rather than having it all in one sitting. Your body can only use so much at a time, I explained. Give it a steady trickle and you'll see better results. Over the next few weeks, Harold found himself feeling not only stronger, but more capable. The chair stands that felt slightly awkward at first became smooth and controlled. Stepping onto that low platform no longer made him feel off balance. Even his grip seemed firmer when he worked in his shop. He was starting to trust his legs again, not just to carry him from point A to point B, but to handle the unexpected, like climbing into the back of his truck or crouching to fix something under the sink. One afternoon, Harold told me about an experience that proved to him how far he'd come. He and Carol had been at the park with their granddaughter, who asked him to push her on the swings. Without thinking, Harold jogged a few steps behind the swing to give her a gentle push. It wasn't a sprint, but it was more than he'd done at that pace in years. "And you know what?" he said, smiling. "My knees didn't complain. My legs felt solid. It's like my body said, 'We've got this.'" That was the moment I wanted him to notice most. Not the numbers, not the exercises themselves, but the function he was regaining in real life. It's one thing to do a movement in a controlled setting. It's another to feel strong and balanced in the messy unpredictability of everyday life. The rebuilding process was also shifting something in Harold's mind. He no longer thought of himself as a man slowing down with age, but as someone actively shaping how his body would carry him through the next decade. His conversations with Carol changed too. They began planning more walks together, even considering a short hiking trip in the fall, something they hadn't done in years because Harold hadn't trusted his legs to handle it. And here's what I wanted Harold and anyone listening to understand. Rebuilding from the inside out isn't about chasing youth. It's about reinforcing the freedom to move, to participate, to keep doing the things that make life meaningful. You can't stop the clock, but you can keep the foundation strong enough to carry you wherever you want to go. As Harold continued this balanced approach, nutrient-rich drinks, steady protein intake, simple strengthening exercises, the improvements became part of his everyday life rather than a special project. He didn't have to think about climbing the stairs anymore. He just did it. He didn't hesitate when his granddaughter asked him to join in a game. He simply said, yes. That's what rebuilding strength from the inside out really means. Not having to stop and wonder whether your body is up for the task. One evening, over a cup of bone broth, Harold reflected on the changes. "You know," he said, "I started all this because I didn't want to lose my independence. But now, it's more than that. I feel like I'm actually getting a piece of myself back. And that's worth every cup, every stretch, every little exercise." I smiled, knowing that this wasn't just about muscles or joints anymore. This was about identity, about a man who refused to quietly step back from the life he loved. And with every choice he made to nourish and strengthen himself, Harold was proving that rebuilding from the inside out was not only possible, it was powerful. It was a breezy morning when Harold and I sat down for one of our regular check-ins. He looked relaxed, his cheeks slightly pink from the short walk over, and there was a lightness in his step I hadn't seen in months. But as we talked about his progress, Harold leaned in a little closer and asked something that told me he was ready to dig deeper. "Doc," he began, "you've talked a lot about inflammation and protein, but you've also mentioned collagen a few times. I know it's in my bone broth, but why is it so important for my legs?" I smiled, because this was the perfect moment to connect another piece of the puzzle. "Harold," I said, "collagen is like the scaffolding inside your body. It's the protein that holds everything together, your joints, your tendons, your ligaments, even the structure of your muscles. Without it, your legs can't stay strong and stable, no matter how much you exercise or how carefully you eat." He nodded slowly. "So it's not just about muscles?" "Exactly," I replied. "Think about building a house. The walls might look solid, but if the frame inside is weak, the whole structure is at risk. Collagen is that frame for your body. And here's the tricky part. After about age 50, your body makes less and less of it. By the time you're in your 70s, that production has dropped so much that the joints and connective tissues don't repair themselves as quickly. That's when you start to notice things like stiffness, slower recovery after activity, or even little aches that linger for days. Harold frowned. That explains a lot. I've had days where I feel fine, then I'll bend down to grab something and my knees ache for no reason. I thought it was just me getting old. It's not just you, I reassured him. It's one of the most common and overlooked causes of leg weakness in older adults. The loss of collagen doesn't make headlines because it's not dramatic. It doesn't happen overnight. It creeps in slowly. That's why I call it the silent leg weakener. I could see the wheels turning in his mind. So the bone broth is helping because it gives me collagen directly? Yes, I said, but it also helps because it delivers the building blocks your body needs to make more of its own collagen. Think of it as giving your body the tools and materials to patch up the scaffolding from the inside. Harold leaned back in his chair. So if I keep up with the broth, I'm basically reinforcing the frame that holds me up? That's right, I said. And when the frame is strong, everything else works better. Your muscles have a solid base to pull against, your joints move more freely, and your balance improves because the whole structure is stable. He chuckled softly. Makes sense. I've rebuilt enough fences in my life to know you can't just replace the boards. You've got to make sure the posts are solid. I laughed, knowing he'd just summed up collagen loss in the simplest way possible. But I also wanted him to understand that replenishing collagen isn't just about bone broth. You can also help your body by eating foods that support collagen production. Things like citrus fruits for vitamin C, which helps your body link collagen fibers together, or leafy greens for their antioxidants. And of course, keeping up your protein intake is essential because collagen is a type of protein. Harold nodded. I can do that. Carol makes a mean spinach salad and I can throw in some oranges. We also talked about movement. One of the best ways to signal your body to keep producing collagen, I told him, is to use your joints and muscles regularly. It's the same idea as telling your muscles they're still needed. You've got to let your body know that strong, flexible connective tissue is still a priority. That meant Harold's gentle strengthening exercises weren't just building muscle. They were telling his body to keep reinforcing the scaffolding. Every time he stood from a chair without using his hands, every calf raise at the kitchen counter, every step on the low platform was part of a quiet message to his body. We still need these legs strong, so keep the frame in shape. Over the next month, Harold doubled down on his collagen-friendly habits. He kept sipping his bone broth, added more vitamin C-rich fruits to his breakfast, and made a point of doing his strengthening exercises even on days he didn't feel like it. And slowly but surely, his legs began to feel not just better, but sturdier. He noticed it when he bent to tie his shoes and came back up without that small grunt. He noticed it when he climbed the front steps carrying a bag of groceries and didn't have to pause at the top. One afternoon, Harold and Carol went to visit friends who lived in a second-story apartment. A few months ago, those stairs would have been an obstacle he'd approach cautiously. This time, he took them at a steady pace, chatting the whole way up. When they reached the top, Carol gave him a knowing look. "You didn't even notice the stairs, did you?" she said. Harold grinned. "Nope. Didn't even think about them." That evening, as he sat down with his cup of broth, Harold thought about how different things felt now compared to when he first walked into my office, worried he was losing his independence. Back then, the idea of feeling strong again seemed far away. Now, it felt real, tangible, achievable, and all because he'd learned to care for the parts of his body most people overlook until it's too late. When Harold came in for his next appointment, I could see that confidence in his posture. "Doc," he said, "I think I get it now. Muscles are important, sure, but if I don't take care of what's holding them together, I'm just building on a shaky frame." I nodded. "Exactly. And the good news is, you've already started reinforcing that frame. Every cup of broth, every healthy meal, every time you move your legs with intention, you're adding to the strength you'll carry with you into the years ahead. Harold smiled, the kind of smile that comes from understanding you're not at the mercy of time after all. And as he stood to leave, his steps were easy and sure, the silent weakener in his legs now met with a quiet but steady resistance, one he'd built himself from the inside out. The first cool days of autumn had arrived, and Harold came into my office wearing a well-worn flannel shirt, smelling faintly of wood smoke. He had been helping his neighbor stack firewood that morning, a task that just a few months ago would have left his legs stiff and aching for hours. This time, he moved more easily, his steps confident as he walked into the room. "I'm feeling pretty good, Doc," he said, taking his usual seat. "But I've been reading a little about protein. You've been telling me to eat more of it, and I've been trying. But I'm still wondering, why is it such a big deal now? I've eaten meat and eggs my whole life. What's changed?" It was a perfect question, because it touched on one of the most overlooked issues in healthy aging, how our ability to use protein declines as we get older. I leaned back in my chair and began to explain. "Harold, think of protein as the bricks your body uses to repair and build muscle, bone, and even skin. When you were younger, your body was great at breaking down the food you ate, pulling out those protein bricks and putting them straight into construction. But as we pass the age of 60, something changes in the way we digest and process protein." Harold tilted his head. "What kind of change?" "Well," I said, "part of it is in your stomach and intestines. As we age, we produce less stomach acid and fewer digestive enzymes. Those enzymes are what break down protein into amino acids, the smaller pieces your body can actually use. Fewer enzymes means less efficient breakdown. So even if you're eating the same amount of protein you always have, your body may not be pulling as much of it into your system." He frowned, thinking about all the breakfasts he'd had over the years. "So you're saying I might be eating enough, but I'm not getting enough?" "Exactly," I replied. "And there's another layer to it. After 60, our muscles also become less responsive to the signals that tell them to grow and repair. Scientists call this anabolic resistance. In simple terms, your muscles need a louder, clearer message and more building material to get the same response they would have when you were 40. Harold chuckled. "So my muscles are basically hard of hearing now?" "That's one way to put it," I said with a smile. "Which means you have to speak louder. By eating protein more consistently, in the right amounts, and paired with movement to tell your muscles, we still need you." We talked about how many older adults tend to eat the bulk of their protein in one meal, usually dinner, and how this isn't ideal for someone in Harold's position. "Your body can only use so much protein at once," I explained. "If you give it 20 or 30 grams at breakfast, another 20 at lunch, and then more at dinner, you're feeding that construction crew all day, instead of just one big meal at night." Harold nodded. "So, more like giving them steady work, rather than dumping all the materials on them at the end of the day." "Exactly," I said. "That steady supply is key. And remember, your body needs those amino acids, not just for your muscles, but also for your collagen, your immune system, and even the enzymes that keep your digestion running." I could see him thinking this over. Harold had always been a practical man, and the idea that he could make a big difference just by adjusting when and how he ate was appealing to him. We decided on a plan. Harold would start adding a clear source of protein to every meal. Breakfast might be scrambled eggs with spinach, Greek yogurt with berries, or even a smoothie with protein powder, almond butter, and banana. Lunch could be chicken, tuna, or lentil soup with a slice of whole grain bread. Dinner would remain much the same: lean meats, fish, or tofu, but he'd pay more attention to portion sizes and balance. He also agreed to keep up his gentle strength exercises. "Remember," I told him, "protein on its own is like bricks sitting in a pile. You need exercise to tell your body where to put them. Harold grinned. Got it. No point having a yard full of bricks if I don't build the wall. Over the next few weeks, Harold noticed something he hadn't expected. His energy in the afternoons was steadier. He didn't have that mid-afternoon slump where he'd sit in his workshop and lose the urge to finish what he was working on. His recovery after small projects improved too. Stacking wood, raking leaves, or carrying laundry upstairs didn't leave him with that next day soreness that used to be so predictable. One Saturday, Harold and Carol decided to tackle cleaning out the garage. They were on their feet most of the day, lifting boxes, moving tools, sweeping out corners. That night, Harold sank into his recliner with a satisfied sigh, expecting the familiar heaviness in his legs to creep in. But it didn't. The next morning, he got up, stretched, and realized his legs felt almost normal. That protein stuff really does work, he said over breakfast, and Carol just smiled knowingly. When he came back for our next appointment, Harold told me he was also feeling stronger during his exercises. The chair stands that used to feel like a workout now felt easier. He'd even added a few extra repetitions without me suggesting it. I figure if the crew's got more bricks, and he said, I might as well give them more building to do. I reminded Harold that what he was experiencing was the result of two things working together: the extra protein giving his body more raw materials, and the movement telling his muscles to put those materials to use. It was a simple combination, but one that too many people overlook, often because they assume protein needs don't change with age. Before Harold left that day, I gave him one more piece of advice. Don't think of this as a temporary boost. Think of it as your new normal. Keep feeding your muscles and collagen every single day, even when you feel strong. That's how you keep the gains you've made and protect them for the years ahead. He nodded, tucking the idea away. Harold had always been good at maintenance of his tools, his home, his truck. Now he was starting to see his body the same way. And with every deliberate meal, every set of chair stands, every walk around the neighborhood, he was proving that even after 60, you can give your body the fuel it needs to not just survive, but thrive. As he walked out of my office that day, Harold glanced back and said, You know, Doc, I think I'm starting to enjoy this building project, and the best part, I get to live in it. It was a chilly Friday evening when Harold first told me about the night cramps. We were sitting in my office as the late afternoon sun slanted through the blinds, casting long golden streaks across the desk. He shifted in his chair, rubbed his calf absent-mindedly, and said, Doc, I've been waking up most nights with my legs locking up like someone's twisting them with a wrench. The way he described it was all too familiar. These weren't the occasional, mild cramps you can stretch away in seconds. These were the deep, sudden jolts that rip you out of a peaceful sleep, make you sit bolt upright, and leave you pacing the bedroom floor at 2 a.m., trying to walk them off. They don't last forever, Harold said, but after one of those nights, I wake up feeling like I've already run a marathon before breakfast. Night cramps can make anyone miserable, but for Harold, they carried an extra weight. They reminded him in a small but constant way that his legs weren't the reliable tools they used to be. It wasn't just about losing sleep. It was the erosion of trust between him and his own body. I've run into burning buildings without flinching, he told me once, but now I'm lying awake wondering when the next cramp is going to hit. That's not me. We started with the basics. I asked Harold about his hydration, his diet, and his activity levels. He was doing reasonably well in most areas. He drank water throughout the day, stayed active in his workshop, and had been working on his nutrition since we began our journey together. But something still wasn't adding up. That's when I decided to take a closer look at his minerals, specifically magnesium and potassium. Both are essential for healthy muscle contraction and relaxation. Without enough of them, muscles can tighten uncontrollably, which is essentially what a cramp is, a sudden, involuntary contraction. When Harold's lab results came back, they told the story. His magnesium was on the lower end of normal, and his potassium wasn't quite where I wanted it to be. Neither number was dangerously low, but together they painted a picture that matched his symptoms perfectly. I sat down with Harold and explained it in plain terms. Think of magnesium and potassium as the electrical wiring for your muscles, I said. Magnesium helps your muscles relax after a contraction, and potassium keeps the signals between your nerves and muscles steady. If you're short on either one, those signals get messy, and that's when you get cramps. Harold nodded, tapping his fingers on the arm of the chair. So how do we fix it? Supplements? I could have gone that route, but I preferred to start with food. It's not just about filling a gap. It's about making changes that fit naturally into daily life so they stick. I suggested he try starting his mornings with a banana and almond smoothie. Bananas are rich in potassium, and almonds are packed with magnesium, plus a little healthy fat and plant-based protein. Together, they make a combination that fuels the body, supports muscle health, and helps prevent those nighttime cramps. We kept it simple: one ripe banana, a cup of unsweetened almond milk, a spoonful of almond butter, and a pinch of cinnamon for flavor. Harold could toss everything in the blender in under a minute. It's not complicated, I told him, but done consistently, it could change your mornings and your nights. Harold took to the idea immediately. The next time I saw him, he told me he'd been having his smoothie every morning for a week. It's not bad, he said with a grin. Better than the dry toast I used to eat. But what he really wanted to talk about was the sleep. Doc, he said, I haven't had a cramp all week, not one. That was exactly what I'd hoped for. The magnesium and potassium from his new breakfast were doing their job, calming the nerve signals, relaxing the muscles, and helping his body recover overnight. He also told me he was waking up feeling lighter on his feet, more ready to move right away instead of shuffling around, waiting for the stiffness to fade. The change wasn't just physical. Harold's mood improved too. Sleep without cramps meant deeper rest, and deeper rest meant more energy and patience during the day. Carol noticed it as well. You're not snapping at the coffee maker in the mornings anymore, she teased. Harold laughed, but he knew she was right. One evening, Harold told me about a moment that made him realize just how much better things had gotten. He was in the living room playing with his granddaughter when she asked if he could help her build a fort with the couch cushions. A few months ago, the thought of kneeling on the floor and getting up again quickly would have made him hesitate. Now, without thinking twice, he was down on the carpet arranging pillows and blankets, laughing along with her. I didn't even think about my legs, he said. And that's the point, isn't it? Yes, that's exactly the point. The goal isn't just to remove pain or cramps, it's to remove the fear of them, to restore the quiet confidence that your legs will be there for you when you need them. Harold kept up the banana almond smoothie routine without complaint. It became part of his mornings the way brushing his teeth was, automatic, essential, and not worth skipping. He even started experimenting with it, adding berries for extra flavor or a scoop of Greek yogurt for more protein. But the foundation stayed the same: potassium from the banana, magnesium from the almonds, and the knowledge that he was actively protecting himself from the cramps that once dominated his nights. A few months later, as winter settled in, Harold realized something remarkable. The cramps hadn't returned, not once. His legs felt steadier, his mornings brighter, his nights uninterrupted. And it all began with a simple shift in his daily fuel. When he came in for his checkup, Harold leaned back in the chair and said, "Doc, I don't want to jinx it, but I think I've got my legs back." I smiled. "You didn't get them back by luck, Harold. You got them back by listening to your body, feeding it what it needs, and being consistent. That's how you go from cramps to confident steps." And with that, Harold stood, shook my hand, and walked out into the crisp air, his stride sure and steady, every step a quiet victory over the nights that used to hold him hostage. Harold was never much of a smoothie guy. In his younger years, breakfast usually meant black coffee and maybe some toast with butter if he was feeling generous toward himself. Even after retiring, he kept that same routine. "I'm not a fancy breakfast person," he'd tell me with a shrug, but that changed the day he realized a simple drink could be the difference between waking up rested and pacing the floor at 2 a.m., trying to walk off a leg cramp. The first time Harold tried the banana almond smoothie, I suggested, he was skeptical. "This is too easy," he muttered as he tossed a banana, a cup of almond milk, and a spoonful of almond butter into the blender. It whirred for less than a minute, and before he knew it, he was holding a tall glass of pale gold liquid. He took a cautious sip, then another. "Not bad," he admitted. "Actually, pretty good." But flavor wasn't the point. Function was. That smoothie was a concentrated dose of two key nutrients his body had been quietly craving for years: potassium and magnesium. The banana delivered a rich source of potassium, essential for regulating muscle contractions and preventing them from seizing up during the night. The almonds, both in the milk and the butter, brought magnesium, which helps muscles relax and recover after they've been used. Together, they formed a team that could stand guard over Harold's legs while he slept. The first week was promising. Harold made the smoothie every morning, sometimes sipping it at the kitchen table, other times carrying it into his workshop to drink while he organized tools. And night after night, something incredible happened. The cramps stayed away. At first, he didn't want to get too excited. It could be a coincidence after all. But after the second week, he couldn't ignore it anymore. He was sleeping through the night, waking up without the lingering soreness that usually followed a cramp attack. "Doc," he told me during our next appointment, "I think this thing is actually working. I can't remember the last time I had to leap out of bed in the middle of the night." His eyes lit up when he said it, and I could see how much the change meant to him. Sleep is more than rest. It's recovery, repair, and the foundation for the energy we carry into each day. Without it, everything else, strength, balance, mood, starts to crumble. The beauty of the smoothie was its simplicity. Harold didn't have to overhaul his diet or remember a complicated schedule. It was one action taken once a day that addressed a core problem, and because it was easy, he didn't mind keeping it up. That's the hidden secret to long-term change. If it feels like a burden, it won't last. But if it fits seamlessly into your routine, it becomes as natural as breathing. Carol quickly got on board too. She started making her own version with berries and a little spinach, and before long, the blender had a permanent place on their kitchen counter. "It's the first appliance I've ever used every day," Harold joked. But deep down, he knew it wasn't just about the drink. It was about taking control of a problem that had once made him feel powerless. One evening, Harold and Carol went to a friend's house for dinner. They stayed later than usual, chatting in the living room over coffee. As they walked home under the crisp night sky, Harold realized he wasn't worried about what might happen when he went to bed. Months earlier, he would have been bracing himself for that sharp jolt of pain that could strike without warning. Now, he felt confident his legs would let him sleep in peace. That peace of mind is worth more than most people realize. Night cramps don't just hurt, they create a kind of low-grade anxiety that lingers even during the day. Harold told me once that he'd find himself stretching in the afternoon just in case, as if trying to outsmart the cramps before they started. Living that way takes a toll. But now, with his smoothie habit firmly in place, that mental weight had lifted. The smoothie also gave Harold another unexpected benefit: more consistent energy in the mornings. The natural sugars from the banana gave him a gentle boost without the crash, and the healthy fats from the almonds kept him feeling satisfied until lunch. He found himself more willing to tackle small projects before noon, like fixing a squeaky door or tidying the garage, instead of easing slowly into the day. When I asked Harold what kept him committed to the routine, he didn't hesitate. "It works," he said simply. "And it's not a chore. I can make it half asleep if I have to. Plus, I actually like it now." That's the sweet spot I always hope my patients will find. A healthy habit they stick with, not out of duty, but because it genuinely makes their life better. We also talked about variations to keep things interesting. Sometimes Harold swapped the banana for mango, or added a small handful of oats for extra fiber. Other times he sprinkled in a little cocoa powder for a richer flavor, but no matter the twist, he made sure the potassium and magnesium were still there. Those were the non-negotiables. Months later, as winter gave way to spring, Harold looked back on the change with a kind of quiet pride. He couldn't remember the last time he'd had to pace the floor in the middle of the night. He'd gone from bracing for pain to sleeping deeply without fear, and all it took was listening to his body, understanding what it needed and giving it that gift every single morning. One afternoon, while sipping his smoothie on the porch, Harold watched his granddaughter race up and down the yard. She ran over, grabbed his hand, and pulled. "Come play, Grandpa." Without thinking, Harold set down his glass and followed her across the grass. They ran, laughed, and played tag until they were both breathless. Later, as he eased back into his chair, he realized he hadn't worried about cramps, balance, or whether his legs could keep up. He'd just lived in the moment. That's the real victory of small, consistent changes. They don't just fix problems, they give you your life back, piece by piece. And for Harold, the banana almond smoothie was more than a breakfast drink. It was a daily reminder that his legs weren't giving up on him, and he wasn't giving up on them. By the time Harold had been on his new routine for several months, golden milk at night, bone broth during the week, his daily banana almond smoothie, people around him started noticing the change. It wasn't just that he moved more easily, it was the way he carried himself, the steadiness in his walk, the light in his eyes. One Saturday afternoon, while he was helping his neighbor Tom fix a sagging fence post, Tom leaned on the shovel and said, "Harold, you've been moving like you're 10 years younger. What's your secret? New workout? Special pill?" Harold chuckled. "Nothing fancy, just a few small things I do every day." Tom looked at him skeptically. "That's it? No big change? No training program?" Harold shook his head. "Nope. Just simple things I stick to. Every single day." It reminded me of something I often tell my patients. Consistency beats intensity, especially as we get older. The human body loves routine. It doesn't respond well to sudden, extreme changes, but it thrives on steady, repeated actions. Small daily habits become like drops of water wearing down a stone. Not much to look at in a single moment, but powerful over time. When Harold first came to me, he was looking for something that would make a noticeable difference fast. That's natural. We all want the magic bullet, the quick fix. But quick fixes often fizzle out because they're too big to sustain. A strict diet might help for a few weeks, but sooner or later, it feels like a burden. An aggressive exercise program can give you a boost, but if it's too demanding, it's hard to keep up, and harder still to restart if you stop. What Harold learned was that the smaller the habit, the easier it is to weave into daily life without feeling overwhelmed. A warm cup of golden milk before bed? Easy. Bone broth a few times a week? No problem. A smoothie every morning? Takes less than 5 minutes. None of these habits felt like a chore, and because they were simple, he didn't skip them. I remember asking Harold one day if he ever thought about quitting his new routine. He looked almost offended. "Why would I stop? It's part of my day now, like brushing my teeth." That's when I knew he had crossed the threshold from trying something to living it. The truth is, small habits have a way of multiplying. Once you succeed at one, you feel motivated to add another. Harold started with golden milk. After he saw improvement in his sleep and knee stiffness, he added bone broth. Then came the smoothie to fight cramps. Later, he added short daily stretches before bed and a quick morning walk to wake up his legs. None of these were massive commitments, but together, they transformed how he felt. Carol noticed too. One evening, over dinner, she told him, "You know, you seem happier lately." Harold raised an eyebrow. "Happier?" She nodded. You're not frustrated at your legs anymore. You move around without complaining, and you've stopped saying, I can't do that, before you even try. That conversation stuck with Harold. He realized that these small, daily choices weren't just helping his body, they were changing the way he thought about himself. Instead of seeing his legs as a limitation, he saw them as something he could care for and improve. The benefits of small habits also showed up in unexpected ways. One rainy afternoon, Harold had to move several boxes of old tools from his basement to the garage. In the past, he would have done it in short bursts with plenty of breaks, worried about his balance on the stairs. This time, he just took his time, step by steady step, and when he was done, he realized he wasn't sore or winded. The quiet confidence in that moment was worth more than any number on a scale or stopwatch. I explained to Harold that his success was rooted in something called habit stacking. By tying a new habit to something you already do, it's easier to make it stick. For example, he drank golden milk right after watching the evening news. He had his smoothie while checking his email in the morning. He did his stretches before brushing his teeth at night. These anchors made the habits feel natural, like they belonged in his day. One day, Harold's granddaughter asked him why he always made that yellow drink before bed. He smiled and told her, because it helps Grandpa's legs stay strong so I can keep chasing you around. She giggled and said, then you better never stop. That little exchange reminded Harold of his deeper reason for sticking to his routine, not just to avoid pain or cramps, but to keep up with the life and people he loved. We often underestimate how powerful small habits can be because they don't give us dramatic overnight results. But the real magic is in how they work quietly in the background, making small deposits into your health account every day. Over time, those deposits add up. Harold didn't just get stronger legs. He got back the confidence to climb stairs without thinking about it, to kneel down in the garden without hesitation, to walk to the store without worrying about how far it was. One afternoon, while we were talking about his progress, Harold said something that perfectly summed up his journey. I used to think I needed one big change to get my legs back. Turns out, I just needed a bunch of little ones I'd actually do. That's the secret. Big changes make headlines. Small habits make history. By focusing on daily actions that fit his lifestyle, Harold didn't have to choose between improvement and sustainability. He got both. And now, months later, those habits are still part of his day, still feeding his legs the strength they need, still protecting the independence he treasures. As I watched Harold walk out of my office that day, I realized that what he had gained was bigger than stronger legs. He had gained ownership of his health, one cup, one stretch, one walk at a time. And that, more than any quick fix, is the real path to lasting strength and confidence. It was a crisp autumn morning when Harold stood at the edge of his driveway, watching the neighborhood slowly wake up. A couple of joggers passed by. Across the street, his neighbor was walking her dog. A delivery truck rumbled past, the driver hopping in and out with ease. Harold took a deep breath and realized something he hadn't thought about in months. He felt free. Not just physically capable, but free in a way he hadn't felt since before his legs started slowing him down. That word, freedom, meant a lot to Harold. In his firefighting days, freedom meant charging up a flight of stairs with full gear, knowing his legs could carry him anywhere he needed to go. After retirement, it meant walking to the hardware store on a Saturday morning, tending his garden, or taking his granddaughter to the playground without a second thought. But when his legs began to feel heavy, unsteady, and unreliable, that freedom started to slip away. It's not just about mobility, it's about choice. When your legs aren't dependable, you start making decisions based on what you think you can handle. You turn down invitations. You choose the shorter route. You skip the walk to the park because you're not sure if you'll feel steady on the way back. Little by little, your world gets smaller, not because you want it to, but because you're adjusting to the limits your body is setting for you. That was where Harold had been before we started working together. Every choice he made carried a quiet calculation. Will my legs keep up? Will I get tired halfway through? Will I regret this later? That kind of thinking chips away at the joy of living. And the hardest part? Most people don't even realize it's happening until one day they look back and see how much they've given up. When Harold first walked into my office, his goal wasn't to run marathons or climb mountains. He simply wanted his legs to keep pace with his life. What he discovered along the way was that taking action, starting with the smallest daily habits, wasn't just about avoiding decline. It was about taking back his freedom before it slipped too far out of reach. Now, months later, Harold could see the difference everywhere. He no longer hesitated to take the stairs at the library instead of waiting for the elevator. He didn't think twice about walking to the store for milk, even if it meant carrying the bag back. And perhaps most importantly, he could say yes to things again without that nagging inner voice warning him about what might go wrong. I remember one Saturday when Harold told me about a spur-of-the-moment trip he and Carol took to the farmer's market downtown. In the past, he would have carefully planned it, figuring out where to park, how far he'd have to walk, whether there would be a place to sit and rest. This time, they just went. They wandered from stall to stall, tried samples of fresh bread, chatted with vendors, and bought a basket of late-season apples. It felt normal, Harold told me, like I wasn't thinking about my legs at all. That's what I want people to understand about leg health. It's not about the legs themselves. It's about what those legs allow you to do. They are the vehicles for the life you want to live. They carry you toward the people, places, and experiences that matter most. And when they're strong, you have choices. When they're not, your world shrinks. Too often, people wait until the shrinkage becomes obvious before they take action. They wait until walking across the room feels like a chore, or climbing a single flight of stairs leaves them winded, or balance issues make them afraid of falling. By then, the decline has been building quietly for years. But it doesn't have to get to that point. You can start strengthening, nourishing, and protecting your legs long before you lose the ability to do the things you love. Harold's story is proof of that. The changes he made, golden milk, bone broth, the banana almond smoothie, gentle strengthening exercises, weren't heroic or extreme. They were simple, doable, and consistent, but together they rebuilt the foundation of his freedom. His legs became not just stronger, but trustworthy. And when you trust your legs, you trust yourself to keep living the life you want. One evening, Harold and I were talking about the progress he'd made, and he said something that stuck with me. You know, Doc, when my legs were giving me trouble, I didn't just lose strength. I lost a piece of myself. I stopped saying yes to things. I stopped doing little jobs around the house. I even stopped walking over to the park to sit on the bench and watch the world go by. I didn't notice it happening at first, but now I'm getting it back. Getting it back, that's what this is really about. Not chasing youth, not reversing time, but reclaiming the parts of your life that slipped away because you didn't feel steady on your feet. It's about feeling like you again. For Harold, that meant not waiting for the perfect time to start. He could have told himself he'd make changes after the holidays, or when the weather warmed up, or when he felt ready. But he didn't. He started where he was, with what he could do, and he let those small steps build on each other. And because he started, he gave himself the gift of momentum, the kind that grows stronger with every day you keep going. If there's one thing Harold's journey makes clear, it's that waiting rarely works in your favor. The sooner you start, the sooner your body can begin repairing, rebuilding, and rewarding you with more energy, stability, and confidence. Every day you wait is another day you're letting your legs and your freedom slip just a little bit further out of reach. Now, when Harold stands at the edge of his driveway, watching the world go by, he knows he's not just watching, he's ready to join in. Whether it's a walk to the store, a trip to the park, or a day spent exploring somewhere new, he knows his legs can carry him there, and that quiet confidence is worth more than any pill or quick fix could ever offer. The truth is, freedom isn't just about having the ability to go where you want. It's about not having to think twice about whether you can. That's the kind of freedom Harold has rebuilt for himself, and it's the kind of freedom anyone can work toward if they start now, not later. So if you're reading this and wondering whether you should take the first step, let Harold's story be your answer. Don't wait. The sooner you begin, the sooner you'll find yourself standing at the edge of your own driveway, not watching life pass you by, but ready to walk right into it. It was a bright spring morning when Harold stopped by my office. He was wearing a light jacket, his cheeks were pink from the breeze, and there was a spark in his step that hadn't been there a year ago. He sat down in the chair opposite me, crossed one leg over the other with ease, and said, "Doc, I think I've finally figured out the secret." I raised an eyebrow. "Oh? And what's that?" Harold smiled, leaned forward a little, and said, "It's not just about what you do. It's about how you think about what you do." That one sentence summed up what had carried Harold from the man who used to dread a flight of stairs to the man who now looked forward to his morning walks. And that, I told him, is the one mindset shift that keeps people strong after 70. Stop seeing your body as something that's inevitably failing and start seeing it as something you can actively support, maintain, and even improve, no matter your age. When Harold first came to see me, he was worried, even a little defeated. His legs felt heavy. Stairs left him winded. Night cramps robbed him of sleep. In his mind, this was all just part of getting older. That belief made him hesitant to try anything new, because why fight something that can't be changed? But once he began to see small improvements from the golden milk, the bone broth, the morning smoothie, the stretching, and the gentle strengthening, something clicked. This wasn't just age, this was his body responding to care. That shift from resignation to responsibility was the real turning point. Once Harold stopped assuming decline was inevitable, he started thinking like a man who had some control over his future. And when you think that way, your choices change. You stop looking for magic fixes and start building small, sustainable habits that you know you can keep. One afternoon, Harold told me a story that illustrated this perfectly. He had been at the grocery store when he noticed an older gentleman struggling to get a case of bottled water into his cart. Harold stepped in to help, and as they chatted, the man said, "I used to be able to carry these no problem. Now, my legs just aren't what they used to be. But that's life, right?" Harold just smiled politely, but later he told me, "Doc, that used to be me. I used to think like that. But now I know better." Knowing better doesn't mean pretending age won't change you. It means understanding that how you age is shaped by how you live. Harold knew his legs might never feel like they did when he was 30, but he also knew they didn't have to feel like they did when he first walked into my office, tired and unsteady. This mindset shift also changed the way Harold approached setbacks. There were still days when his legs felt a little stiffer or more tired. The difference was he no longer saw those days as signs that his progress had failed. Instead, he treated them as feedback. Maybe I didn't hydrate enough yesterday, he'd think, or I skipped my stretch last night. Better make time for it today. He stopped seeing bad days as the end of the road and started seeing them as part of the process. And that's the heart of staying strong after 70. You keep moving forward because you believe it's worth it, even when progress isn't perfectly linear. You measure success not just in how you feel today, but in how far you've come since you started, and in your commitment to keep going. Harold's shift in mindset also had a ripple effect on his daily life. He began to look for opportunities to use his legs instead of avoiding them. He chose the stairs over the elevator. He offered to carry light groceries instead of letting Carol do it. He volunteered to rake leaves at the community park. Every time he did something active, it reinforced his belief that his body was still capable, and that belief made him more willing to keep moving. One of my favorite moments was when Harold told me about a weekend trip he and Carol took to the coast. They stayed at a small inn near the harbor, and one morning they decided to walk the long pier. It was a breezy, sunlit day, and the pier stretched out farther than Harold remembered. In the past, he might have hesitated, worried about making it to the end and back. This time, he didn't even think twice. They walked all the way out, leaned on the railing, and watched the boats. On the way back, Harold turned to Carol and said, "You know, a year ago, I would have skipped this. I would have told myself it was too far. But today, it was nothing." That's what the mindset shift does. It changes your definition of nothing. A short walk becomes easy. Stairs become routine. Carrying a bag of groceries becomes no big deal. And when those everyday actions stop feeling like challenges, they stop holding you back from the moments you want to live. The truth is, staying strong after 70 is less about one perfect exercise or one miracle food, and more about believing that your actions matter, and then taking them every day. The people who stay strong are the ones who never stop feeding their bodies, moving their muscles, and protecting their independence. Before Harold left my office that morning, I asked him what advice he'd give to someone who felt like he did a year ago. Tired legs, low energy, and the belief that it's just part of aging. He thought for a moment and said, "I'd tell them this. Stop waiting for your body to give you permission. Start doing the small things now, even if they seem too simple to matter. And trust me, they matter." That's the essence of the mindset shift. You don't wait for proof before you act. You act, and the proof comes. You stop telling yourself it's too late and start proving to yourself that it's not. You treat every cup of nourishing drink, every short walk, every stretch before bed as an investment in your freedom. As Harold stood to leave, I watched him walk out into the bright spring sunlight. His stride was easy, his back was straight, and there was no trace of the man who once feared he was losing his independence. This was a man who had taken ownership of his health, not through one grand overhaul, but through steady, thoughtful steps, guided by a new way of thinking. And that's the one mindset shift I wish I could give every person over 70. You are not a passenger in your own aging process. You are the driver. Your choices still matter. Your actions still count. And as Harold will tell you, the best time to start is right now. Harold's journey began with uncertainty and quiet worry. His legs felt heavy. The stairs seemed steeper, and night cramps robbed him of rest. He thought it was just age closing in, slowly taking away his independence. But with a few small, deliberate choices, everything began to change. Golden milk eased the stiffness in his knees and restored restful sleep. Bone broth nourished his joints from the inside out, giving him the building blocks to move with more confidence. A simple banana almond smoothie calmed the nighttime cramps that once kept him pacing the floor, and gentle daily movements reminded his muscles they were still needed, reinforcing his growing strength. What began as a hope to simply stop getting worse turned into something much greater. Harold started getting better. He reclaimed his mornings, walked the stairs without hesitation, and said yes to moments he would have once declined. He began to trust his legs again, not just to carry his weight, but to carry his life. This wasn't a miracle. It was the quiet power of consistency, small habits, repeated daily, that worked together to rebuild strength, restore confidence, and open the door to freedom. Harold learned that it's not the size of the change that matters most. It's the choice to begin and the commitment to keep going. So if you've been feeling your world shrink because your legs won't do what they used to, remember Harold's story. You don't have to wait for the right time. You don't have to do everything at once. You just have to start today with one small step toward caring for yourself. because the sooner you choose to move forward, the sooner your legs and your life will move with you.